Thank you. I repeat my thanks to Professor Longo and to everybody. My speech is dedicated to Kurt Fischer, who was my boss when I was at Harvard, and when I practically began to study what I wrote then in my book. So the question of my presentation, you can read this one. It's useful to paraphrase the title of a book written by Steven Pinker, a very, very important researcher at MIT in Boston. And the title of the book is The Stuff of Thought. And my question is, what is the stuff of literary reading? And second, is it perhaps not only the stuff of our dreams, this is a quotation of The Tempest by Shakespeare, but also the stuff of a key educational goal based on learning how to put yourself in other people's shoes in order to learn to improve your relationships with others. School and life skills. At school we don't teach only the subject matters, but also life skills. So, as far as literary studies are concerned, teachers must promote both cognitive and psychosocial competencies. First, literary competencies are students' ability to comprehend, to analyze, to contextualize, and to interpret literary texts. Second, psychosocial competencies are based on the teaching of life skills in a supportive learning environment. And as far as teaching literature and life skills are concerned, we have to consider that life skills, particularly connected to the teaching of literature, are the capacity to feel empathy and the ability to handle emotions and cope with them. Now, a definition by Professor Baron Cohen can help me. Empathy occurs when we suspend our single-minded focus of attention and instead adopt a double-minded focus of attention. And is our ability to identify what someone else is thinking or feeling and to respond to their thoughts and feelings with an appropriate emotion. If I cry, an empathic person doesn't laugh, of course. So there is no doubt that education is much more than its neural aspects. But brain and biological sciences can illuminate many of its processes and methods. These three researchers, Antonio Battro, Kurt Fischer, my boss at Harvard, and Jean-Pierre Lenat, practically are very important in connecting this particular kind of studying. Now, some basic neurocognitive assumptions concerning reading. The three major jobs of the reading brain are recognizing patterns, planning strategy, and feeling. So, reading a word is connected with this operation, and I can explain them by this slide. First, from 0 to 100 milliseconds, there is a phase in which you turn expert attention to letter, and so are involved deep frontal lobes, cingulate gyrus under the interhemispheric fissure, and also the thalamus. So, deep frontal lobes in this area, in which we can see the Broca's area, and here you can find also the we'll see the anterior insula, and the cingulate gyrus. The cingulate gyrus is here, and it's very important as far as reading abilities are concerned. Okay, between 50 and 150 milliseconds, there is a phase in which you recognize a letter and your brain changes. And this happens in this area, the occipitotemporal area number 37, near Wernicke's area. It's a temporal lobe and is particularly concerned with the visual, the image of the words. Occipitotemporal area number 37 is the visual area, which decodes the image of the words. From 100 to 200 milliseconds, you connect letters to sounds and orthography to phonology. And this is particularly important in Wernicke's area, in the temporal lobe. And finally, from 200 to 500 milliseconds, you get to all that we know about a word. This is the phase of the syntactic and morphological processes. Okay, so now a particular emphasis has to be underlined as far as the right hemisphere. Right hemisphere is involved in processing certain aspects of prosody. Prosody is concerned with the tune and the rhythm of speech and how this feature contributes to meaning, and plays an important role in narrative and inference. Narrative refers to the ability to construct or understand a storyline, whereas inference refers to the ability to fill in the blanks and make assumptions about material that is implied. So, practically, as far as literary reading is concerned, left hemisphere is a sort of archive of usual brain's operation connected with the routine, whereas the right one is connected with the hypothesis shift and the intuitive operations. Okay, now a definition by the Wignemont and Singer, who define empathy as follows. We empathize with others, and this new definition is useful to explain the connection with literature, between literature and neurological science. We empathize with others when we have an affective state which is isomorphic to another person's affective state, which was elicited by observing or imagining. This is very important, not only by observing, but also by imagining literature, another person's real or simulated, and affective state. And when we know that the other person's affective state is the source of our own affective state. Okay, the reader. Who is the reader? The reader of a literary text follows the emotions of the characters and the word of their knowledge, reads the minds of the characters. He is able to read the minds of the characters, and is involved in a process of absorption in a pretend world, and becomes a sort of immersed experiencer. When a reader reads a literary text, there is a sort of particular state, because the reader's perception of a text fictionality plays a role in subsequent empathetic response by releasing readers from the obligations of self-protection through skepticism and suspicion. Practically, we forget the suspicion. Children and adults alike have the capacity for absorptions in a pretend world. Once we enter that state of absorption, it is the events occurring within the imagined world that drive our emotional system. Once absorbed into an imagined world, the appraisal processes are set to work on the events of that world. Now, this slide make evident the areas of the empathy circuit between persons in a real context. So, medial prefrontal cortex and the anterior insula, very important, the area of the mirror neurons, and temporoparietal junction on the right side, posterior superior temporal sulcus, somatosensory cortex, and the inferior parietal lobe. Of course, also the area which practically is under the cortex, the limbic system, is involved, the amygdala. It's very interesting to say something about mirror neuron system. Mirror neuron-related responses in both the dorsal portion of the inferior frontal gyrus and in the dorsal portion of the inferior parietal lobe have been demonstrated in humans using different neuroimaging techniques. The results of these studies highlight the important role of this system in understanding not only other sections, but their intentions and mental states as well. As we can see here, the number 40, the Brodmann area number 40, and the 44. So, now I have to tell you something about, again, about the mirror neuron system. Directly relevant to the neural underpinnings of empathy is the notion that the mirror neuron system may provide the neural mechanism by which we can understand others' emotion. A clear prerequisite for the ability to empathize with them, either in the reality or in the fictional context. According to such models, the anterior portions of the insula play an important role in achieving an emotional representation by connecting the limbic system to mirror areas. And now the connection with literature. The experiments suggest a key role of mirror neuron areas in the reenactment of sensory motor representations during conceptual processing of actions invoked by linguistic stimuli. So, when we read a novel, mirror neurons simulate the described actions as though we were doing them ourselves. Now, in my opinion, it could be very interesting to verify a story-based empathy study in which the researchers try to inquire which areas are involved when we empathize with a character. And you can see medial prefrontal cortex, posterior superior temporal sulcus, temporoparietal junction, posterior cingulate cortex, temporal pole, superior frontal gyrus, and amygdala. Probably you remember what I told you some minutes ago, and this slide is clearer. And now I compared the two circuits, the empathy circuit and the empathy circuit involved in reading literature. And in my opinion, it's very interesting to verify an evident situation. You can see that the two circuits share a large percentage, about 60%, involved in feeling empathy, either in real context or in a simulated one. The images compared, I think that can demonstrate with approximate evidence what I told you. And now we can see another, and I'll come now to the connection with education. Kaufman and Libby define experience-taking as a mechanism by which narratives can function to expand reader scope to experience and thereby change beliefs and behaviors. So, by casting aside one's own self-concept and mentally simulating the experiences of a story character as if they were one's own, readers can try out new roles, new relationships, new personalities, new motives and actions, or, as Ayakawa put it, life has many more lives and as many kinds of lives as they wish. So, perspective taking as a source of human empathy, this is my opinion. Empathy may be initiated by a variety of situations. For instance, when one sees another person in distress or discomfort, when one imagines someone else's behavior, when reading fiction. In these situations, empathy requires one to adopt more or less consciously the subjective point of view of the other. Perspective taking is acknowledged as an important source of human empathy. Giuseppe is an important researcher who lives in Chicago. And now, the most commonly nominated feature of narrative fiction to be associated with empathy is character identification, and also narrative situation. By some structures of the literary text, the repetition of words in series, the length of novels, genre expectations, vivid use of settings, meta-narrative commentary, and so on. Now, the simulation of social experience that literary narratives afford provides an opportunity for empathic growth. So, literature is not only a subject matter. In my opinion, is a very important instrument in order to provide this opportunity. It trains us to extend our understanding toward other people, to embody to some extent and understand their beliefs and emotions, and ultimately to understand ourselves. And this is a very nice proposed text, a very nice text by Keith Oatley and Johnson Laird, two very important psychologists as far as education is concerned, cognitive psychologists. We can be our own selves, and we can be Achilles or Anna Karenina. In a process of mental simulation, we put aside our day-to-day concerns and insert the protagonist's goals into our own planning processors. We take on their intentions as our own and experience emotions related to what happens in the story. The emotions are empathetic. As far as emotional education is concerned, the primary goal is for students to become emotionally literate by gaining a holistic understanding of feeling words, which characterize the gamut of a human experience, such as excitement, shame, alienation, and commitment. You know, when you ask an adolescent, how do you do? Very often he answers, I don't know. And he has not also the words, enough words to express his own feelings. Literature can help him. Emotional literacy fosters social competence by teaching students self and social awareness, empathy, and healthy communication. Emotional literacy also helps to develop emotion-related skills through the performance of tasks that teach the four fundamental emotional intelligence skills: perception, use, understanding, and management of emotions. So, I agree with Meyer and Salovey. They teach at Yale. Literature is probably the first home of the emotional intelligences. A student can learn much about the various feelings when reading literary works that depict characters with a tendency to experience specific emotions, can observe how characters express and display their emotions, what makes the characters feel as they do, how the characters cope in response to their feelings, and how effective are the various methods of coping employed. And now, The conclusions. If the empathetic processes activates most of the same neural circuits activated by the reader when he/she empathizes with the characters, so this taking experience can help the reader to learn how to better empathize. Second, if literature simulates the real world or invents possible words, feeling empathy for fictional characters implies more than the comprehension involving imagination. The comprehension is connected with all we used to read, but the interpretation is more and more deep than we can imagine. And because in the work of interpretation, you involve the capability of decoding metaphors, your feelings, and also the mind's eye, the capability of imagining with your interior eye what the writer proposed to you. And third, a real emotional arousal gives readers the opportunity of trying to put themselves in other people's shoes with lower stress level and of becoming more ready to do it in real life. Sorry, first, second, what I told before, and now third and fourth. From this viewpoint, this sort of emotional training can surely be considered a basic educational goal. And literature, in my opinion, is a really important educational tool to achieve it, also in the light of the latest findings in cognitive neuroscience. Because if it's true that our brain works for about 60%, 65% when neurons fire when you read, in the same way when you empathize in the real context. So I think that this training by literature could be very useful, as for especially in this our hard Western times. I don't know Eastern, but Western, I'm sure. Thank you for your attention. The quotation is by a poet, an American poet I appreciate a lot, Emily Dickinson. She's right, I think. The brain really is wider than the sky. Thank you for your attention.